when you graduated in 1966 from high school, you had four choices. You either went to college and hoped you got deferment. You went to Canada because you didn't want to be drafted, or you were drafted, or you joined. That was your four choices. And I thought to myself, I don't want to go to college. I didn't like school per se. Not that it was all that bad, but I just didn't want to. I didn't want to continue to study, go to college. So I thought, well, that took that option out. I wasn't. They called them draft dodgers in the day. I wasn't interested in trying to go to Canada. I don't like snakes. I didn't like the concept because when you graduated in 1966, if you got drafted, you were going to Vietnam. It was a given. So I thought to myself, okay, and you may have heard this before too, but worst case scenario, if I join the Navy, worst case scenario, I end up on a ship off the shore, or maybe not even off the shore there, someplace else in the world, or stationed someplace else in the world. I thought, I kind of like the odds better. I'm not a hero by nature. I'm not unpatriotic, but I didn't really relish the idea of possibly getting killed. So I started at the beginning of my senior year of high school. I said to myself, if I'm going to go in the Navy, I need to go talk to a recruiter and find out how do I go about doing that? So at the beginning of my senior year, I went to the recruiter and we had a chat, and he said, what are your interests in school? And I said, okay, I play trumpet in the band. And he says, are you very good? I said, some people say I am. I don't know that I'm great, but I do okay. I was first chair as a sophomore in high school, in trumpet section. And so he says, go talk to your band teacher, band instructor. And he says, see if he'll give you a recommendation. So I went back and I got that recommendation, and he says, I recommend you to go into music in the Navy. So the recruiter says, you can try out for the Navy School of Music. But I had to get the recommendation first. So I thought, okay. I said, but now getting a recommendation isn't enough, is it? And he says, oh no, you've got to go take a test. So you got to go someplace to take a test. They'll determine whether you're good enough to go into Navy School of Music and then end up playing the Navy band or wherever, And so I thought, so I asked him, I said, what's involved? And he says, you have to take the test. I said, I guess I can do that. I said, but what if I don't don't pass the test? He says, I can set it up so that you can go down there and they'll fly you down there, take the test. Got to go down to San Diego. You can take the test. If you fail the test, they'll fly you back home, and then you're going to take your chances, getting drafted or whatever. He says, or you can stay down there and go ahead and join the Navy. And he says, how old are you when you graduate from high school? I said, I'm still going to be 17. My birthday's in July. And so I was 17 when I graduated from high school and didn't turn 18 until July 3rd. He says, the Navy has something called a kiddie cruise, as in child, kiddie cruise. And he says, if you get in before you turn 18, they will guarantee they will let you out the day before you turn 21. So I thought, 3 years is better than 4 years. Why not? He says, we can get you set up so that we'll take you down there. We'll fly you down to San Diego. You can take the test for the Navy School of Music. If you pass, obviously you do that. If you don't, you can go ahead and say, I'm going to go ahead and join anyway. They flew me down there on June 29th. And because of the way the holiday worked that particular year, I only had one more day that I would have been able to get in before I turned 18. So I joined on the 29th of June, just short of 18 years of age. So that's how I ended up in the Navy. Oh, and the other thing, he says, by the way, if you sign up, if you actually sign up to do this and you go ahead and go through it and you don't make the Navy School of Music, he says, I can set it up so that you're guaranteed a Class A school, meaning the introductory schooling in whatever field that they end up putting you in the Navy. So I said, that sounds good. So he set all that up. When I went down there and I didn't pass the test. And in the Navy, they have logbooks for everything they do so they can justify or not, whatever, anything that happens. So when I took the test and I didn't play good enough to do it, probably, but I got to looking at the logbook as he's going and filling out the paperwork. He's got this logbook opened up, and there's names on this side and names on this halfway down this side, whatever. And I'm guessing there's probably 30 to 40 names over here and another 20 or so over here. And I'm looking and, it says what instrument and whatever, and pass, fail, whatever. Nobody on either page had passed. So I didn't feel quite so bad, because I figured, okay, they obviously do not need musicians in the Navy right now. They didn't need anybody in the Navy. They didn't have openings for the Navy School of Music, basically what it told me. So I thought, okay, I'll just go ahead and join. So joined and went through boot camp in San Diego, and that's how I ended up in the Navy. My orders out of boot camp were go to Class A school first, and they sent me to Illinois, to the Naval Base. The name's not coming to me right now. Great Lakes. They sent me to Great Lakes to go to Class A school. At the end of Class A school, I got orders to go to Da Nang and be a mechanic. So they sent me to Little Creek, Virginia to do that. And I was waiting to go through the survival training for that. And then I was supposed to go once I got through survival training, I was supposed to go to Da Nang. So we're waiting for the next class to open up to go through survival training. You know what survival training is, right? They call it SEER. And we're waiting for class to open up. And there's 13 of us that had all graduated from engineman school together. And all 13 of us had the same orders. And we got to the point where we'd been there like a couple weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, something like that. And they mustered all of us out for daily check-in in the morning or whatever. And they said and they listed all 13 of us, and they said, now you guys all stay. Everybody else is dismissed. You guys all stay. Your orders have been changed. So our new orders were to go to not do the survival training in Little Creek, Virginia, but to go do them instead in Coronado, California, San Diego area. Your survival training's there. And because your orders got changed, you're changing orders, they said you're going to go home for 30 days, and then you'll report to Coronado to do the survival training. After you get done with survival training, then we're sending you to Mare Island in San Francisco, Vallejo area, and you'll go through training for, and they didn't use the word river patrol boats. I don't remember what they used, but it was operations in Vietnam. And so I asked somebody, I said, well, what are we getting trained to do? I said, well, you're going to be on river patrol boats. I said, well, or actually they said, you're going to be on PBRs. I said, what's a PBR? It's a river patrol boat. I said, well, like a swift boat? They said, well, yeah, but smaller. So they're a 31-foot fiberglass boat. By that, having gone through engineman school, by the way, that when I did my testing in boot camp, they decided that that's where my talents was mechanical things. Interesting thing about that was I really hadn't worked on engines. I really hadn't done any of that kind of stuff growing up. My dad bought new cars every 2 or 3 years. That's another story. So new cars all the time. So I never worked on anything. We were on a little farm, but not big enough one to have a tractor or anything like that. So I didn't even driven any equipment or that kind of thing. I learned to drive like everybody else does, but I hadn't done any boat stuff or worked on any engines or any. But they sent me to engineman school, and I picked up on it pretty quick. And anyway, so instead of going to Da Nang, I ended up on river patrol boats and found out what those were, and thought to myself, your plans about joining the Navy, about worst case scenario, you're going to be on a ship out on the shore, or you're going to be, so the best laid plans of mice and men thing obviously didn't quite work out that way, since river patrol boats are kind of in the thick of it. But I got to thinking about it. It actually made a lot more sense than me stomping around in the jungle with the punji stakes and the snakes and the foot rot and all the other diseases and stuff that you had to put up with. And of course, the Marines and the guys and the Army guys and whatever that were stomping around over in the jungle thought we were crazy for being on a patrol boat out in the middle of the river. And their comment was, well, you're just like a duck in a pond. I said, yeah, but trust me, this duck gets real mad if you shoot at it. And those boats, I don't know whether you've seen the boats, but 350 caliber machine guns and a 60 caliber machine gun and a Honeywell grenade launcher. I said, if you don't get me, if you don't sting me pretty good right at the very beginning, you better duck. Because when all that firepower cuts loose, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So yes, we were a duck on a pond, but I say we were an angry duck. They talk about angry birds. We were an angry duck. When I flew into Tonsanut, the Air Force Base there, the very first thing that happened, I'm saying to myself, oh God, what have I got myself into here? As we're waiting to land at Tonsanut, the pilot gets on the plane and he says, we're going to have to just fly around here for a little while. Tonsanut's getting mortared. I thought, uh-oh. We landed and I was in, the barracks or whatever there for a while and waiting for my assignment where I was going to go. And finally got my assignment and they told me I was going to River Section 531. And I got to 531 and I found out that I was a replacement for the guy that had gotten killed. So that was kind of my introduction to Vietnam, is getting mortared before we landed, and then finding out I was a replacement for a guy that died. And so that's how I got. And the section was where we were first located was a little town called Mytho, Mytho is the name of the town, and it was a shore base. So they had a pier with pilings and docks and stuff for the boats to tie up to. And interestingly enough, they sent 2 of us out of those 13. Another friend of mine, his last name was Thompson, from Wisconsin. They sent the 2 of us there, and because one guy had gotten killed, the warrant officer that was in charge of the maintenance for all the boats, he says, you're going to be the mechanic for the boat replacement. It was the other guy. So I was on until I stayed on base maintenance until basically somebody went home on, permanently or whatever, or on leave. Anyway, so I was a mechanic working on the boats in the shop on the shore instead of going out on patrols. Well, Thompson went out on patrols. And that ended up, I don't know, probably saved my life. I don't know. There's no way to know what would have happened. But I ended up, in the time that I was over there 18 months altogether. And in the time that I was over there, I probably went on, I think maybe 100 to 120 patrols. I never really counted, which is not very many for a year and a half. It should have been closer to probably 300. And so I didn't spend a lot of time out on the water. And the reason I didn't was because the warrant officer that was in charge of the maintenance really liked me and thought I had a good aptitude for fixing stuff. And eventually, I hadn't been there very long, and he put me in charge of night maintenance. And I was only an E2 at the time. So you get out of boot camp, you're an E1. You get out of you're a fireman. They call it a fireman apprentice. And then the next one is straight fireman. I was only an E2. I had been in the Navy almost a year, and he says, why are you only an E2? I said, I haven't been, because I went from this location to this location, to this location, to go home on leave, to this location. He says, why are you still an E2? I said, I haven't had an opportunity to take the test to go up for the next rate. He says, you're an E3. I said, what? He says, yeah, I just promoted you to E3. So I got my first promotion. So now I'm a fireman instead of a fireman's apprentice. And he liked me. So anytime somebody went home or they needed an engineman, I'd go out on patrols for a while. And as soon as a new person came in, the warrant officer would say, put the new guy out on the patrol. I want White back. And that pretty much when I went, that warrant officer and then the next warrant officer, the word went from one to the other and said, you need to keep him as the main mechanic if you can. So I ended up doing a lot of work on the boats as opposed to going out on patrols. I was there for the Tet Offensive. I don't know how much you know about that, but the Chinese New Year thing happened in 68, the Tet Offensive, where the North Vietnamese and the VC put on this big offensive. And I was in My To at the time, and I remember being at the hotel. We stayed in a hotel when we weren't on the boats, and I remember being in the hotel when it hit that night and being sniped at in the hotel. I found out after the fact that the town itself might have been overrun, except there was a division or a group of Vietnamese regular ARVN soldiers that were going from some location to another location, and they went through My To, and it was late enough in the evening that they weren't going to be able to get to where they were going, so they stayed in the park there in town, and that kept the town from getting overrun. There was another time while I was at My To when I was again, I worked maintenance, and they put me in charge of night maintenance. So sometimes I was the only guy that was working at night to do last minute stuff. I remember one time we got mortared, and the deal was if you're getting mortared, whoever was down at the pier where the boats were, it was your responsibility to get all the boats away from the pier, because what they're trying to do is hit the boats. They didn't really care about the maintenance facility or anything else. They just wanted to put the boats out of commission, right? So the deal was if you were down there and there was only 2 or 3 of us down there, there was the guard and I don't remember somebody else, and I think there was only 3 of us. And so the boats that are still at the pier, the ones that are on patrol, which would have usually been at about 6 of them, you had to get them underway. So I remember running out. So they got this big building with a doorway in the end of it that you pull the boats into to work on them, pull them up out of the river and to work on them. And so to leave the facility, I was in the facility working on something. So I went running out to get the boats away from the dock. So here's the door. And I went running through the door, and I turned to go to the left to go down to the dock. And just after I cleared the door, a mortar came through the roof, right where I just ran. Ran down to the dock. So then all the boats have to get underway. So there's only 3 of us. So what you do is all the boats are, they're tied together. So you got one on the dock, and then you got another one, and sometimes another one. So I ran down there, and there's 3 boats all tied together. I jumped on, untied the ones to the dock, jumped into the one in the middle, started the engines, and drove all 3 boats away. So, so that's a couple of experiences that, I remember one time we're out on patrol and we're idling along, and all of a sudden the pumps, they're a water jacuzzi pump. So they have an impeller rather than a propeller. And so we would hit vegetation and it would put them out of balance, and then they wouldn't shoot the water out like they're supposed to. So the mechanic's responsibility, there's a cover inspection on the top of the pump. You'd take the cover inspection off, and they'd shut the engine down, and you'd make sure the guy didn't start it up, because you'd put your hand down in there and you'd pull the vegetation, out of the pump. So we're idling along, and he says, he all of a sudden shuts one of the engines down. He says, I got something, some vegetation or something in the pump. So I popped the cover off the thing and put my hand down in there, and I grabbed a hold, and it pulled back. He'd sucked up a water snake. All the water snakes are poisonous. Fortunately, I didn't grab the business end. I pulled my hand out of there, put the cover back on, and I said to the boat captain, I said, start that thing up and run it as fast as it'll go for a while until that gets out, it is back in balance like it should be. I says, I'm not putting my hand back in there again. Of course, after you run it a little while, but I wasn't going to put my hand back in there. So that was another time. And then there was a time that we were tied up next to the other boat, talking to him about something out in the middle of the river, and a patrol, we were getting ready to be relieved. And so we were just sitting there waiting for the other patrol to come relieve us, middle of the day or later in the afternoon or whatever. Anyway, So we're sitting there tied up to each other with actually, I don't think we were actually tied, but we might have just been side by side. And the other patrol that was going to relieve us, they come driving, but flying by, and they slowed down, but not a lot. So we got this wake. So you've been out on the, you know what happens when you got a wake, right? So these boats are going like this, and they banged into each other. Did you see the M79 grenade launcher? Not the one that goes like this, but the little gun that has the big barrel. It's hanging over the engine cover, just like that one is down there on that boat. The boats went bang. That M79 fell off the thing and hit the deck and discharged the grenade that was in it. Came out of the thing, went from about where you're sitting to that wall and hit the wall. Fortunately, it hadn't gone far enough to arm. And I was standing near enough. I was the closest person to it. So I look, and here's this, this like gold grenade looking thing spinning around on the deck. And I reached down and I thought, I don't want that on the boat. So I picked it up and threw it over the side. Anyway, so, I had at least 3 other instances. Yeah, I wasn't in a firefight, but there's at least three other times that I shouldn't be here. Anyway, so I was 3 weeks before I was scheduled to come home, and a directive had come down from Saigon saying they wanted our river section to patrol in a certain area 24 hours a day up in these narrow canals, 24 hours a day. And we would go up and we would stay in the canal and patrol in the canal to keep the Viet Cong from moving ammunition and medicine and all that stuff around. We stayed up there for 5 days, 24-hour, 5 days. Okay, and patrolled that whole time. And then you would get relieved by there were patrols were always 2 boats, lead boat, cover boat. So when the 5 days were up, one of the other tandem of patrols would come out and relieve you. Those people would go back to the ship and get some rest and get anything done that needed work on the boat that needed to be done. So when they decided to do that we'd go up there 5 days, they decided they wanted some of their best and most experienced mechanics on those boats, because they're not going to come back to the ship until the end of 5 days unless there's some reason that they needed to that accounted for it. So my best friend, who was also another one of the good mechanics, we both have to now do a patrol, even though I'm in charge of night maintenance. We were on the LST, Jennings County at the time. So I went Mito, the Harnett County, and then the Jennings County. We were on the Jennings County, like I say, it was about 3 weeks. This would have been middle of November, 1968. And they said, so you guys have got to do a rotation up in the canal. And I thought to myself, well, I'm 3 weeks away from coming home. I don't really want to do this, but I wasn't given a choice. And I said to myself, well, probably I'll do this one time and then maybe that'll be, I won't have to do it again. And I couldn't refuse. I guess I could have, but I didn't refuse. So we go to get on the boats to leave the ship and go up in these canals, little narrow canals. The width of this room is long. And, the boats are 31 feet long and this room is probably 40, maybe a little less than 40. So you can turn a boat around, but it isn't easy to do it. Okay. So anyway, we go up in these canals and so we go to so if you're going to be there for 5 days, you got to have some changes of clothes and, so you got a sea bag with stuff in it, I don't think the guys ever brushed their teeth over there, but whatever, the stuff that you wanted on the boat. And the boats, I don't know whether you've seen any pictures or whatever, but the boats are tied up to these landing ship tank boats. And so there's a boom that goes out on each side, and there's a lead rope that goes down to them. And so basically you get down onto the boat from the ship. So you don't carry your sea bag down the ladder, the Jacob's ladder that's on the side of the ship, or shinny down the lead rope or whatever. You just throw your bag down there and then you climb down and get on the boat. So I threw my bag down and I told him to put it on. And I don't remember at the time. I do remember the number of the other boat. the 109 boat. I said, put it on 109, and I threw it down, and whoever went to put it away didn't hear. So they put my stuff on the other boat. I think it was boat 110, but they put my stuff on the other boat, and they put my best friend's stuff on 109, the one that I was supposed to be on. And the reason I was supposed to be on it, I was considered the head mechanic at the time of the regular PBR guys, not necessarily the head mechanic of all the stuff, but because the day shift mechanic were members of the ship, or in the case of Mito, they were people that were stationed at the Mito facility. But I was the lead mechanic of the PBR mechanics. So the two boats that we were on, 109, the reason I chose that one is it had work done on the engine, and the other one had work done on one of the jacuzzi pumps. And the likelihood of something going wrong with the jacuzzi pump is quite a bit less, not hardly any moving parts. The engine's got all kinds of stuff that can go wrong, right? So I said, I'll go on that boat, because if anything needs to be fixed, I'm the trained person to do it. Well, they mixed up our gear. So when we got down to the boat and I looked and see to make sure that my stuff got stowed away, I noticed mine wasn't there. I said, well, where's my stuff? He says, oh, I don't know. Isn't that yours? I said, no, that's Mike's. And I said, well, I'll just stay on this boat. And I kind of, when I discovered which boats we were going on, I thought to myself, this probably is what I wanted to do anyway, because the coxswain, or the guy that drives the boat on the boat that I was supposed to go on, was the kind that never let go of the steering wheel. He wouldn't let anybody else drive the boat. That's just the way he was. He'd had to be dead tired or whatever. I mean, nobody's going to drive the boat but him. The guy that on the boat that I went on was kind of just the opposite. He didn't really care. And because I didn't get to go out on many patrols, I liked driving the boats. So I said, I'll just stay on this one. And so, I didn't remember the boat captain's name now. Oh, yes, I do too. Because we both got commendations and medals and stuff for this anyway. I said, Cecil, do you care if I drive the boat? His name is Cecil Martin. I said, do you care if I drive? He says, no, go ahead. So I'm driving the boat. So we go up in the canal and to replace these other two boats that are up there. And we got up in the canal, and there was a miscommunication between us and the patrol that we were replacing of where we were going to rendezvous with them. And so we couldn't raise them on the radio. But we were able to raise the ship, which is quite a bit farther away, but they've got big, tall antennas on the ship. I mean, like way up in the air. So we're getting good radio communication with them, and the ship had good radio communication with the other patrol. So the communication got sent from the ship to us and to the other patrol, meet at such and such a location. Well, I heard, this is again hearsay, that whoever sent the message to us used language just like we're talking. If I said down here, meet on 13th and Harborview, instead of the code that told you it was 13th and Harborview, that they just spoke the English, where we were, the Rock Saw or whatever it was, the name of the canal, and where it meets whatever little canal, you're going to meet it where the junction is, where those two are. Well, guess who was listening? The VC were listening. They set up an ambush because we had a while to go before we got to that location. We got there first, and when we got to where the intersection was, this was when we got in the firefight, they hit the cover boat. I was driving the lead boat. I was the coxswain on the lead boat. And the VSC always would hit the cover boat because the lead boat now, in order to deal with what happens, is behind them. So they've only got basically one 50 caliber machine gun and theoretically 160 caliber machine gun to deal with what's going on behind, because the two big guns are up on the front. The twin 50s are on the front. And besides that, you got to turn around to go back to deal with it. So they hit the cover boat, and the first rocket, well, I don't know whether it was the first or not, but they got hit by two rockets. One of them hit in the radar dome, that big marshmallow looking thing on the top, and it has a metal base that everything is fastened to with the fiberglass cover over it. A piece of metal from the rocket hitting that flew off of it and went down, and a guy was sitting up on the front of the boat. He was an extra person that was going along, and cut his leg seriously. I mean, like right to the bone with that piece of metal. The other rocket came into, have you looked at the boats? So it came into the coxswain's flat. So you've got a wall here. These boats down here have a wall in the middle. I was on a Mark I boat. They do not have the wall in the middle. They've got armor plating over here, and the coxswain drives the boat from right here. It hit right in the middle of the armor plating on this side. When I wasn't driving the boat as the mechanic and the M60 operator, I would stand right there where that rocket came. That's where I would have been standing had I been on that boat. And very easily could have been hit by the B-40 rocket. My best friend was standing there instead, and it went through into that armor plating and exploded right behind his back. He didn't die. He was seriously injured. The guy that was driving that boat was knocked unconscious. The guy that was driving the front, that was in the front turret, was knocked unconscious. And the guy that was sitting up there in front of where I would have been standing had his leg severely cut. So he wasn't able to do anything. And I think he was unconscious as well, not just because of getting cut, but the concussion of the explosion. The only guy available on the boat to do anything was the rear gunner. He was far enough away. And so he was able to keep the fire down. But when the coxswain, the guy that was driving the boat, got hit, he fell to the deck, and his hand was on, probably just his right hand, because when he went down like this with his arm, and the boat that he was driving, we're just at an idle. We're just driving along at an idle. The boat beached itself right where one of the rockets came from. And there was a bunch of VC there with small arms. The rear gunner managed to keep everybody that was shooting at that boat, and eventually us, from getting on the boat and killing the guys that were on the boat. I turned the lead boat around and pulled it up alongside of the boat that got hit and held it in position while the rest of the crew got the injured off of that boat, and then we left the area. So that was my one firefight, but it was a doozy. And I came home with a Bronze Star with a Combat V. I had to do what I had to do, and I had to do it quickly, and I had to do it without thinking about it, and I had to have enough guts to do what I was trained to do without getting scared. I absolutely was cool as a cucumber until about a half hour later when we had cleared the area, and I was so weak with adrenaline I almost couldn't stand up. I just absolutely, everything but fell apart physically. But when it counted, I did what I had to do. So proud of the fact that I helped save those 5 guys' lives that were on that other boat. Did my part at least, Anyway, that was my firefight. I had a lot of other close encounters, but no firefights other than that one right before I came home. I got back to the ship and I told the CO, I said, I just went on my last patrol. He says, what do you mean? I said, I've got 3 weeks left in country. I want to go home and see my wife and my daughter that's less than a year old. She was born while I was over in Vietnam. I didn't see her in person until she was 5.5 months old. And I said, I want to go home and see my wife and my baby girl. And so I'm not going any more tours. He said, well, I can understand that. You're short enough. Funny thing about it is there's a thing that everybody will tell you. The guys that got killed in Vietnam, within the first 2 months, or the last 2 months, more specifically the first month or the last month, I was the last month, and I didn't get killed. My buddy had been there half a year. So the tables should have been turned, but I always say God had other plans. And I thank the Lord that I'm still here. Where I was from, the area I was from in Oregon, interestingly enough, I wasn't all that far from Portland, but I was far enough away from Portland that I didn't experience any of that. None. In fact, to the locals, I was in a little town called Aurora, Aurora address. Actually, the town that I lived in was even littler than Aurora. But I was, greeted warmly, more like a hero rather than, than a bad guy. And so I didn't have to deal with any of that, which is really good. I didn't really experience any what you'd call significant PSTD because I didn't get in a bunch of firefights. Was never in a situation where I knew I had killed the enemy. There may have been some times that it happened, but not that I was aware of. In fact, when I was driving the boat, I obviously wasn't shooting the gun when that firefight, so I know I didn't kill anybody there. And, I just thought of one other time another reason I shouldn't be here. So we're out in this little canal, and it's the middle of the day, and I'm standing on the engine cover by the M60, and I've got my back to the side of the canal, and there's a BC sniper there, unbeknownst to me, and my back was to him. It literally could have been a target. My big broad back, probably, maybe twice the distance from here to the other, maybe 100 feet away, is where he shot from, with just a little, probably an AK-47. But he decided not to shoot me, even though I was the obvious target, because the boat captain, you wouldn't have been able to see him very well at all, because he shot from the starboard side of the boat, and I was standing with my back towards the starboard side of the boat. The rear gunner has the rear 50 has a armor plating thing that the gun pokes through, so he's behind that. The front gunner is on his turret, and he's just got the 250s pointed forward, so we're kind of by where the guy shot from. So the boat's here, and he's back here, and I'm standing right there, and I got my back to him, so I'm the obvious target. He decided to shoot for the head of the front gunner, because that's really from his vantage point, based on where the bullet hit. From his vantage point, that he decided to shoot him in the head. Unlike the boat down here, the Mark I's boats, which was what I'm on, had a U-shaped thing that on each side of the gun turret that you would put your hands on, so that you put your feet on the floor and you could turn the turret easier. So that metal thing was in between the guy's head and where the bullet came from. So it's about this wide. It's like an inch outside metal tube that goes like this. Instead of hitting the front gunner in the head, it hit that metal tube, didn't go all the way through the other side. It went into the tube and hit the other side and glanced down and went down and ended up being down by the guy's feet, the front gunner. So he didn't get the front gunner either. If it hadn't been for that metal tubing thing, the front gunner would have had a head. He would have been hit in the head because he was right behind where the bullet was. And all I heard was a pop, and I thought, what is that? And the front gunner says, I just been shot at. And the bullet's down here by my foot. So, what's that? 4 different times other than the firefight? I shouldn't be here talking to you. I've considered writing a book, not specifically about Vietnam, other than the 5 times. The title of my book would be, and if I ever write it, Why Am I Still Here? Beginning at, a very young age, up until even just a few recent years, there's a lot of reasons why I shouldn't be here. So I think to myself, God must have had other plans for me. Either that or I have an amazing guardian angel. That's what I took from it, that I'm blessed and proud of the fact that I was able to do what I needed to do when I needed to do it without fear. That's kind of what I take from it. And that, and the fact that as an 18-year-old, I wasn't even 19 when I first went over there. As an 18-year-old, I grew up to be a 30-year-old in about a year and a half.